Happy holidays. Here we are.
Here we are, right in the middle, right between. This is like, how they have transition wardrobes between
Yeah.
seasons? I
Oh,
feel like we're in
yeah.
transition seasonal holidays, though we did decorate for Christmas yesterday.
Yay. Well, how
Yeah.
was your Thanksgiving? If you could like encapsulate the feeling of your Thanksgiving, because I saw a picture on your Instagram,
Mhm.
I think, of like everybody, and there was like multiple tables and
Mhm.
generations.
Yep. It was wonderful. How's that for a word? It was wonderful.
Mhm.
Because one, we didn't have Thanksgiving last year. I mean, we had the six of us at our house. Well, no, my mom joined us. We had seven of us for Thanksgiving last year. And it was different than how we'd been doing it since we've had kids. So it felt so good to be with a big group of people. And I think too, because we were all so happy to be together, things that maybe would have been, I don't know, points of tension, or not that we really have many, but we just let things go and we just allowed ourselves to enjoy and celebrate and have fun together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, isn't that great? I know I saw a picture. I was looking at pictures from last year, and it was of my mom standing outside masked, and she had made a little turkey cheese ball.
Mhm.
And she was like holding it out. And that was like the extent of us seeing her on Thanksgiving, my mom and dad.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, the turkey
Mhm.
cheese ball last year in a mask.
Frozen.
Yeah.
Standing outside
Yeah.
frozen. Yeah, that's what we did last year too. So we exchanged food outside.
Mm-hmm.
So I took pie orders last year for my sister-in-law's families and my in-laws, and just made pies for everybody. I mean, I had time. I did have
Yeah.
time. So I think I made like 12 pies last year.
Oh,
This year I didn't have to make 12 because we were all together.
I
So
know.
it was
I told you need to open a pie shop because you've really gotten into pies.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
pies. Um, so how was your Thanksgiving?
It was really good. It was great. And it gets me thinking about this whole idea as we're wrapping up the legacy series today. And we're looking at how can the holiday season and the traditions and the rituals that the holiday season brings, how can that lead to strengthening that family legacy that we've been talking about on this whole series? And what does that really look like? And why does that happen? What is it about traditions and rituals that really lay the groundwork almost for a piece of legacy? And as we're looking at that, I'm just wondering if you have some ideas about why is it that traditions and rituals keep us grounded, and how do they give us this sense of connection and stability in a world that honestly feels pretty upside down? I mean, we thought 2021 was going to, just be totally like recovered better, and it didn't turn out that way. In fact, in some ways it got more chaotic. And so talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think often that annual traditions, offer us an annual marker. So they're the days that stand apart, or the events, or the rituals that stand apart. I mean, we remember unique experiences. So they are separate from the day to day that kind of just becomes one big mesh. So, like, for example, I said last year at Thanksgiving, I can remember what we were doing because it was an unusual day, whereas the rest of last fall was one big virtual school with us stuck at home. So
Mm.
that was the only day we made pies and took them to everybody outside and did a food exchange outside.
Mhm.
So I think it helps us mark time, and then we can see progress from year to year. Now, progress makes it sound like we're moving forward and that things are moving in the right direction. Sometimes it feels like it marks a year and life has gone in the wrong direction, like last year. So, but it helps us offer some stability because it's predictable, if it's a
Mhm.
tradition that we kind of carry out in the same way. So, my children decorated the Christmas tree yesterday, and one turned to another, these two in particular. always argue about how the tree is going to be decorated?
Oh,
Do we have a matching, everything looks beautiful tree, or do we have every ornament we've ever made? And it's so interesting to see their personalities play out that way. But one said to the other, are we going to argue about that this year? So there's a tradition, right? That I don't necessarily promote and I don't necessarily like, but it is predictable.
oh
And
my gosh.
last year they came to a compromise. And so they said, okay, this year we're going to go with the same compromise we went with last year. But I just want to say sometimes traditions happen on their own that we as moms or holiday orchestrators don't intentionally create them, but they morph and become part of the tradition. And so then we have to ask ourselves, is this part of the annual marker we want, or do we need to intentionally move a little bit?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really see, pulling kind of way back. I really see, like, if you look at the family and how it's changed over the last century, like a family from like I remember my grandma talking about her childhood, and like that was so different than our kids' childhood. I mean, it's like night and day. I mean, in her lifetime, she saw the evolution of the family completely change. And now we have families that are often running to club sports, and they're getting, in fact, my son is up at 6 a.m. for practice in the gym every day of the week right now for basketball because they're limited on gym space. But it's like you're going from like the early morning until late in the day, where often families are rushing through dinner or trying to, screech in for dinner. And then you've got computers. And so you've got work well into the night, often for parents and children.
Mhm.
And so then pretty soon families start to feel really disconnected because they're running on this hamster wheel that all of us kind of find ourselves on to some degree or another, some more than others. And then we have social media, which portrays like these perfect families. And that's not real, right? And
Mhm.
that's false. And so then you're kind of caught in this tension of like, well, they have the perfect family and I'm on the hamster wheel. And you've got this like giant tension in between. And neither one is right, the kind of the goal. And so what I think traditions do is they bridge that gap a little bit, and they help us to really focus on connection, and they make us stop. So we
Mhm.
stop, we get off the hamster wheel,
Mhm.
but they also bring us out of that space of the ideal, which is not healthy either. And they bring us to this place of connection, which I think is more the goal. That is actually why we do traditions and rituals, because we understand that that connection creates that belonging. And the belonging is what kind of creates that long-term legacy that then hopefully is that invisible thread, which you and I have talked about in this series. Like, it's hard to put a finger on legacy, but it's this invisible thread that runs through generations. And how that happens is there has to be connection there. And so as I look at like, why do we do this? Why are these important? Because it does force us to stop. It forces us to focus back into those rooted places of connection. And that ultimately is what creates that belonging. So it's that important, I think, as we look at why traditions and rituals help us in our lives, and why that, like you said, that natural rhythm, that natural yearly rhythm is actually really good for us,
Mhm.
because it does cause us to pause. And it
Mhm.
really is that catalyst for us pausing and doing things differently.
Mhm. I will say, I think sometimes we get stuck on things being the same. And sometimes we have to adapt traditions because of our families are changing or the world is changing. And I am wondering how last year and how people had to adapt, how that's and have continued to adapt is going to change how we carry out the holidays, or what is important to us. And like our church last year did an outdoor Christmas Eve service because that was the only way we could do it with the restrictions in Denver at the time. And I noticed in the church bulletin yesterday that we're doing that again. We'd never done that before, but there was something lovely about being under the night sky and to be considering the Christmas miracle under the night sky. And so it was as if we got to experience something new and different, that it was actually good,
Mm-hmm.
that we are continuing. And so I'm just wondering how, and I don't have an answer, but how this last year, 2 years is going to change how we do the holidays, both for good and maybe not so good.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yeah,
have any thoughts on that?
I really like that. Well, I think what it has caused is fresh eyes. And I think anytime we can push the refresh button on life or how we're doing something is always healthy. And the point with traditions and rituals is that we do something. We stop and whether you change that or you do it differently, I don't think that's really the point. It's more that you're just doing it, that you're showing up for the tradition or ritual. Because, for example, as kids get older, you have to do that anyway because they're not going to like at 5 what they like at 15. Those are two really different, they're in really different places. And so you have to adapt. Some things never change, like cookie decorating, for example. Everybody likes that, but they're going to want to do, different traditions. And so I really love that idea of, I think COVID really helped us to look at life with new eyes and actually come, like you said, with your Thanksgiving and coming back to some of those things that we couldn't do before. Well, now we have a renewed appreciation even
Mhm.
for the old traditions of like having everyone in the same room and having kids' tables and these things that we just took for granted before. Now it's like, wow, this is so beautiful and amazing. And so that's been a gift of the last 2 years that
Mhm.
maybe we didn't quite anticipate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So as we're looking at this idea of legacy, how are the holidays an opportunity to create something that lives beyond us? If that's how we're thinking of legacy, is what remains after we're gone. How do the holidays specifically speak into that? Because there's some unique opportunities.
Well, I do think I love the idea. In fact, we have an exchange student this year,
Hmm.
and I love to hear the way that his family celebrates the holidays and what they do, what they don't do. And you just think, isn't that so cool that all over the world, people are celebrating Christmas and
Mhm.
people are doing it. They do it differently. I mean, they have like more of a focus on like the three wise men and like shoes that you put out and things like that. But all over the world, we're kind of collectively celebrating, which is beautiful. And Christmas, I mean, Thanksgiving is different in that way because
Right.
just we celebrate Thanksgiving. But with Christmas, everybody around the world who is practicing the Christian tradition of Christmas anyway is celebrating. And so that's really fun to think about and to learn even about other cultures and to bring those in. If you have a tradition that is like, for example, if your ancestors are from Norway, you may bring in the lutefisk and that becomes a part of that ancestral heritage that you're bringing into your family, which is creating that legacy. But then also, so we've got that grand scale, but then we bring that down to the micro. And like, then we have within our own family this really sacred, special time of the year where we are celebrating just as our family. And so it's like big and it's small all at the same time. And I love that. I feel like there's something really even sacred about that. And then just the fact that it's intergenerational, that we don't always have spaces where there's multiple generations connecting, or aunts and uncles or great aunts and uncles. So more of that bigger extended family. And I will just say, like, when we're looking at the idea of legacy, that is so important. And I think as we're getting into a culture that, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to say devalues, but is not recognizing the value of the older generation, I think, as much as past generations did, it becomes more important for us to be really in our own families promoting that intergenerational relationship between our extended family and our kids. And so I see that even alone as such a valuable opportunity that we have to just infuse that beautiful nature. I mean, I was reading an article the other day that I thought was so fascinating about why so many young people are in counseling. And they said, in generations past, counseling happened around the table with the grandmas and the great aunts and the aunts and, or the uncles or whatever. That was actual like counseling, right? That's where you worked stuff out and people, asked questions and gave advice, and now that's not happening. And so now we have this whole generation of kids who are seeking out counselors. And I just thought that was an interesting perspective on it, which as we're looking at legacy, now I'm not saying that your child doesn't need a counselor. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is what we can do is offer more opportunities for the older generation to really invest in and pour into that younger generation.
Mm-hmm. And that can be in your extended family, but it doesn't have to be. So if you don't have access to that within your extended family, either because of geography or just because of relationships or the makeup of your family, a church is a great way to do that. If you go to an intergenerational church, which we go to a little tiny church here in Denver, but part of what we like about it is that it is pretty intergenerational, even though we don't have a lot of people of any age group really, because that is the body of Christ. And that is just like a family. We're a family of believers. And so we can access people and invite them into our holiday traditions, even if we're not related to them by blood. So there's my encouragement there.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts to add on that?
Well, I think the holidays give us a chance to really ask 2 questions and then be intentional about them. What do we value and how do we express that value? So a tradition during the holidays is centered around what are we actually celebrating? And so that could be a cultural tradition. It could be a faith-centered tradition. Even birthdays aren't really during the holiday season, but I love the idea of birthdays because we're celebrating that God made a person. Like that's a fun thing to think about. What are we actually celebrating? And then to evaluate, how are we celebrating it? Who are we inviting in? Like we just talked about, who are we inviting in to be part of this tradition? What kind of food is part of it? Because that often shows either cultural tradition or family history. And then how are we spending our money and how are we spending our time in how we celebrate it? That's going to show what we value too. So it just gives us a chance to kind of be intentional about what we're celebrating and how we do it. And if we think, gosh, I haven't really thought about those questions, now is a good time to do it. It's not too late. Like we're not even in December yet. So you can ask those questions still.
Yeah. So that I think brings us to like, what are some practical ways that you can bring that fun into the holidays, that connection, and really evaluate, okay, what do I value? And then how do I reflect that? But research actually has shown that play is one of the main vehicles to connection. And so I think sometimes we think, well, it has to be all meaningful or it has to be all,
Right.
holy and sacred and like everyone's sitting around candles. But it doesn't actually. Play is just a spiritual, but we don't always think about that and think about play in that light. And so do you have any things that your family has done or is doing this year that kind of brings that spirit of play?
Well, last year when we did our food exchange outside, we had 4 households represented, and every household had to bring an activity for us, like something to spend the time, and we could bring prizes. We were just in charge of the activity, orchestrating it, organizing it, and then rewarding kids for participating. And so that was really fun.
Cute.
It was really fun because it got everybody involved. But it also showed kind of diversity of interests too. But my sister-in-law, Kendall's family, they did an egg toss. So they brought raw eggs and then we all got paired up randomly. We had adults and kids. So each pair was an adult and a kid from within the extended family. And it was freezing. Some of the eggs were frozen, and it was hilarious. And we talked about it this year. Remember last year when we did the egg toss? So it's not a tradition we do every year. And this year, my sister-in-law, Lindsay, they put up a new pickleball court in their driveway. I mean, by put up a court, I mean, they put up like a temporary net and some tape on the ground. And we kind of did an impromptu, someone really wanted to do like an official thing with brackets and all that. And we were not organized enough to do that. So it was a very much kind of a round robin where we were constantly changing partners, and it was really fun. And it just got us outside because we were inside a lot, and it was beautiful outside, and it gave some structure to a big group of people. And I think that sometimes is what's hard, because I don't know about in your family, but we have different personalities. Like some people really like structure and some people really don't. And so how do we create something that's a fun activity that both personality types can kind of fit into?
Totally. Yeah. And that's a good thing to think about, because it may not be. Yeah, it's that whole idea, when I was a teacher, we always thought about how do you teach a concept, but then it's called differentiate. That means give kids their own way to flesh that out. And so that's a good way to think about, like, even traditions. How do we like set the table for the tradition, but then let people have their own individual expression within that?
Right.
It's good. We have done the last few years, which the kids really like, is a gingerbread house contest in pairs. And then I put them on Instagram, and Instagram votes for the winners. And so it's a totally like other people are voting. We're not having biased voting happening. And the kids, for some reason, they love it. They absolutely love it. And I think it's that whole idea. They can express their own themselves and whatever they want. They can do as much or as little as they want. And it really has been totally like, when I ask my kids, okay, what do you want to do this year? Everyone picks one tradition that they want to do. And then the whole family has to do it, whatever each person picks. And every year that is one thing that they choose.
That's fun. Well, they're very elaborate, I will say. Having voted, though, see, this is where the personalities come out, because one of my daughters would say, Mom, you can't be the judge because you'll say everyone's a winner. And I think I do vote for every one of the gingerbread houses in the Gilbert household, because I'm like, that sounds good. Why wouldn't I vote for it? They're all winners. So
totally.
I don't do well with competition. And so that, again, that's like part of the group personality, right? Some people push back, some people. And so to leave enough wiggle room in there. And you're right, because I do tend to be kind of serious all the time. It helps to have somebody say, let's go play pickleball. And then for me to be like, yeah, that's really a good idea. We could use some.
Well, and then we're going to do one this year that's kind of a secret, but because my kids don't listen to my podcast, they're not going to even know that I'm saying this on here. But my husband and I decided that this year, for one thing we're going to do, and this is my thing. So this is my thing that I've chosen, but nobody knows that I've chosen it because we've never done it. We did it kind of in a different way long ago, but we're bringing it back. We're going to take everybody downtown. And just because then they could go whichever direction, or I don't know exactly how we're going to do it yet, but we're going to meet somewhere, and then we're going to give everybody a certain amount of money. And we're going to say, we're calling it Operation Christmas Spirit. And they can do anything with the money. It just can't be spent on themselves. It has to be spent on someone else or multiple other people. So anyway, that's what we're doing this year, which I'm excited about. It's going to be really fun.
That's fun. I wrote about a church that did that with their congregation in Loving My Actual Neighbor.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
You're loving your actual neighbors. Okay. So let's wrap this up. If you had one piece of advice to give about using the holidays to help create family legacy, what would it be?
Well, I kind of hit on it before, but just don't miss the opportunity that happens every year for us to really make memories. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to let's make memories as a family and let's have fun together and let's create this family identity, that we all desire and that we want. And that happens through those really small actions. I mean, that's how it's built, one brick at a time. And we often need deadlines to really force us to do things. And so the holidays provide that. I mean, Christmas is a deadline. And so in some ways, that's really good for us. And so let's harness that. Let's take advantage of that and actually use that to our advantage, so to speak, in, especially for people who tend to put things off that, like on this day, we're doing this, and on this day, we're doing that. And then that gets to something that you and I talk about a lot. And that is, especially in the Christmas remake, is put the things on your calendar that matter and let the other stuff go. I mean, just today I was kind of finalizing, okay, Christmas week, this is when we're doing this. This is when we're doing this. And then let that be what you do. And then the other stuff that's more periphery and that isn't quite as important, if it doesn't get done, that's okay. Let it go.
Right. Right.
What would your one piece of advice be?
To ask yourself, what do you want to remember and what do you want your people to remember a year from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? Because that's going to quickly help you decide what's important in what you actually do this Christmas. Because if you don't really care if they remember if they got the iPad or not or whatever, then don't make it a priority.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. And we certainly don't want them to remember grumpy parents, grumpy moms, right? So if we're so tired that we're like, we don't want them to look back and say, well, mom was always stressed at Christmas. She was always sick because she was,
right.
It's not what we want.
No, it's not. That's not the legacy we're going for. What's going to remain after we're gone?
Yeah.
Reputation.
Exactly. Well, this has been a great series, Alex, the Legacy series. It's just something so valuable that we can always hold in the forefront of how do we create legacy? And it really does come down to these actions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on to Christmas.
All right.
Ready at our house.
Here we go. Merry, Merry.
Bye.